Welcome back to the ENFASYS podcast. In this episode, we explore how the project turns complex agricultural realities into dynamic models that help us ask and answer a simple but powerful question. What if something changes in the system? To guide us, we have three experts who worked at the intersection of system thinking, behavioral science, and modeling. First, from Nibio, we are joined by Giovanna Teviano Almo, a researcher scientist with over 20 years of international experience working on capacity building, socioeconomic analysis, institutional strengthening, and participatory system mapping. Alongside with her, there is Arianna Dell'Olio, a researcher from the Department of Agriculture and Food Science at the University of Bologna, and her colleague, Filippo Pini. Thank you all for joining us today.
Morning,
Thank you.
Gavin.
So the last episode was indeed about building static causal loop diagrams and static system mapping. Today we want to understand how to move to dynamic system models. And I want to ask you, because you are the team who did this work in the ENFASYS project, where did you start from and how did you move from there?
Yeah, I can take this question. So thank you, Davide. As we already discussed in the previous episode, Nibio was responsible for all the activities within this part of the research work that we did in ENFASYS. So first of all, we collected the data through different procedures like interviews or focus group discussion. All this data were systematized. And then through our work together with the colleagues and the actors at the case study level, we built what we call a map, a system map, a static picture of all the elements that are explaining the system as of today, with all the interactions between those elements. And each case had its own causal loop diagram. And because the goal of the project is to look at this in a European more level, then we needed to shift from the local level of the case studies to a more general level. So the task of Nibio and the University of Bologna with my colleagues here was to understand how we could do this. And we have been struggling, I have to say, because it is not an easy task. But in the end, we found what now we refer to as the Bible. It's a paper by Rocha, is a researcher in Sweden who has been doing this in Latin America. And we saw that there was many similarities in what we wanted to do. So basically, we went from having all these isolated causal loop diagrams into trying to build a bigger picture where we have been looking for each case, that element of the system that had the most connections to the other elements. And this is what in system thinking we call the central variable of a causal loop diagram. And then from that, we have been analyzing through mathematical also methodologies to have something that was actually not just the idea of a few researchers together, but was grounded also on a theoretical solid approach. We have been looking at which were the same variables that were connected to these central variables. And we have been trying to find similarities among those clusters of variables interconnected that are called archetypes. So we have been looking for the same sets of interconnected variables across all the cases, then to do like a puzzle, basically. You were finding the piece that was going into your bigger picture, and you were able to overlay them because they were basically saying the same thing, but across different cases. So this is what we have been doing together. And then the colleagues have been taking over for the more complex part of the analysis, which was to then pass from still a static picture into connecting these now equations into data sets. So I think that Filippo and Arianna can continue.
Thank you, Giovanna, for the very, very well-made synthesis that you provided us of this process. And if I may jump onto this, another crucial step into the harmonization process that you described was the integration of EU transition pathways that were identified by European institutions for the achievement of sustainable farming systems. And relying on the documents that detail these transition pathways, we were able to identify these strategic pathways for transition that were crucial into leading us to maintain the peculiarities of the case study while performing the aggregation. So the transition pathways in question are three. So low input agriculture, extensification of livestock systems, and sustainable consumption and direct selling, to give you a more concrete image.
And I believe they were chosen because of the connection with the case studies of ENFASYS, correct?
Exactly. Both for their strategic power into triggering and enabling the transition, but as well for the thematic matching with the ENFASYS case studies. And as I was saying, this was very important for aggregating and harmonizing the variables while preserving the peculiarities and the specific dynamics in order to elevate the level without missing and losing the input from each case study. And so, this is how the process was done.
Yeah, really thanks to Arianna and Giovanna that really pitched the situation, also how the works developed during long months of understanding and then putting in, let's say, on the screens what we want to achieve in this way. We really want also here to integrate different output, different outcomes of the project, because I think it's also in the soul of the project to have these big interconnections and interdependencies between outcomes of different researchers and work. So here we had, as Giovanna explained, all the static picture and the integration of where we want to go, so the different transition pathways, both for the project and also for the bigger food system transition in Europe. And here now we arrived with a question how we can really visualize the dynamic relationship between the different case studies integrated in the transition pathways. So we decided here to integrate also the outcome from the theory of change that I'm sure you will speak about in some of the episodes of this podcast, so we can calibrate on real evidence of the project. We really think that this is a turning point also in the narrative for us, because we want to ground every evidences from these models on what our stakeholders and then how the researchers deal with the evidence of the stakeholders and create this bigger picture. So we integrated these evidences and then start to, let's say, the technicalities of the models, so all the questions and so on. I don't want to go there because numbers are not really funny every time. So in that case, we want to pitch and visualize the non-linear transition, let's say, of the system, because we know all the movement inside our societies and our communities are not really linear. There are many different ways how they can go, and the interdependencies of different factors are expressed by non-linear transition. It means that things can go on a way on the others, and we have to represent these in our models. When we speak about dynamic in the model, it means that inside the model, inside the relationship of the model, we see this movement that come endogenous from the model itself. So from the relationships visualized in static part and then integrated with the theory of change evidences. And these lead us to see how on a 10-year horizon the different pathways, the different transition pathways, also as Arianna well explained before, can go and where we can go with our different farming system.
Okay, thank you. This episode is a methodological complex episode in a way that what you have done is strongly based also on mathematical models. And the goal was not to discuss specific models and specific equations today, because it is indeed hard without a paper in front of you and showing maybe a presentation. But I have two questions that came to mind while you were talking. The first one is really, what were the challenges that you have faced when at the beginning you had to understood which models to use, which methodologies, and how much time did it take?
Yeah, it took a lot of time, a lot of effort, and long discussions also. Really interesting discussions, because it was both theoretical but also philosophical somehow, because we want to understand really how to represent in the best shape what the different researchers are doing in the project. We deal with the methodological issues, let's say, knowing that what we are doing here in the project is quite innovative too, because we are creating these system dynamic models, but they are behavioral based. So we want to really visualize how the different behaviors evolved. What we want to represent here is the behavioral evolvement, the behavioral interconnection between variables. So variables are actors, are institutions, are market, and in this sense, we didn't find this, let's say, big and wide literature in around. So
yeah, I believe so that when you do something so innovative, it's also hard to base yourself on, let's say, on already existing papers or already existing work, because you're trying to, to increase the bar a bit.
Yeah, as also Giovanna explained before, we based on this Bible, as she called Rocha, but this was the first part of the work, and then from there we need to do, as you, Davide, said, also a step forward and represent the behavioral change and the behavioral evolvement in a dynamic way. That's why we integrate all the outcomes that I already explained. And we need also, in this sense, some level of abstraction in the visualization. But in the end, what we want to reach is this bridge between the systemic approaches and the behavioral approaches, on which, in particular, our research group focus a lot. So. In that sense, the system dynamic model and the behavioral system dynamic models that we are develop is a sort of a bridge between the two different soul also of the project and of the farming system in general. We need to have these two point of view, and we are trying to make them closer and closer and closer to arrive at a representation and results that can represent both sides of the discussion.
Yes, indeed. From the first episode of this podcast, we were discussing indeed that one of the innovations of ENFASYS is to bring together this systemic and this behavior part. And I wanted to ask you, because in the discussion about CLDs and the static picture, we were talking how there is a participatory approach to keep into account the ideas and let's say the preferences of the various actors. And how do you manage to actually keep this into account in the dynamic picture? Is it this what you were mentioning before, this behavioral part that you wanted to keep?
Yes, exactly, Davide. So basically, as you said, the process was participated from the beginning, as also Giovanna was saying. And so basically already the static representation, let's say, moved from a place of stakeholder engagement and participation. And as also Filippo was mentioning, to reach the perspective that we wanted to reach, it required a certain level of abstraction, but we always had in mind all along the fact that we wanted to, as much as as possible, have a grounded model. And for this reason, we also took advantage of our, let's say, participation in other project tasks, as we were also saying before, that has been done across various project tasks. And in particular, we took advantage of of some tasks that we had assigned to us, to Unibo, that were behavioral experiments. And for this reason, this was a very fruitful occasion to operate calibration of the model. So whereas the participation was the starting point and then some abstraction was required, all along we had this goal of iteratively calibrating. And for this reason in particular, we took advantage of one of the behavioral experiments that Unibo had assigned, which is discrete choice experiments, and so in particular, in very few words, the ratio was the creation of the design of the experiment, portraying the main variables and dynamics that we saw from the models in order to test on respondents what was the priority and therefore then be able to transfer back into the model, therefore creating what we call a feedback loop of information. So the results would feed back into the model and further calibrate. So this was part of how we achieved this goal.
Very complex from my side to understand, but I do have maybe some example.
Just some example on that, and as Arianna well explained, and you well understood, is quite complex also in terms of representation, visualization in mind. But yeah, we saw in the models that one of the most important and impactful variable in general and aspect is, let's say, the policy support and the governance support for sustainability. So what we decide here is to derive what we want to ask to our stakeholders, so farmers, in relation to these important variables, so the policy and governance support, which level they prefer of policy support to support indeed the transition. This is related and correlated with other other variables in general that are related to economic viability of the farmers, risk perception, and other relevant aspects that we saw in the models, asking them which level for each of these variables are the best one for them and most preferable. This leads us to both the calibration of the model, so we know what is the baseline and where the farmers really want to go, but also on the other side, understand what kind of transition one of our stakeholders, that are the farmers, maybe the most relevant also, want to achieve and where they want to go. This leads us also to the next step of the project, of our task in the project, our work in ENFASYS.
Yeah, that's indeed what I wanted to say. Of course, also for the listener, it's important to understand that we are recording this podcast when, let's say, there are still 10 months of the project afterward. And your area of work, what we call work package in project terms, is one of those areas of work that are still ongoing and that will still perform work in the next 10 months. So I want to understand at what stage are you now and what will you be doing in the next months? And then maybe another question is then if somebody is interested in going more into details or understanding your results, where can they be found?
Yeah, we still need some months to perform the last activities in the project. For us now, indeed, is opening a really interesting part of the project for us, because we will want to test also now our models and what they are picturing, analyzing different what if scenarios. So what can happen if we do this or if we do that, or and so on. So in this area of of the work, what we want is to perform different interventions, what we call intervention archetype, also coming from the experience of archetypes in the integration of the different causal loop diagrams. So we still call it in the same way. So the same interventions for the different for all the three transition pathway, and so the models. For that, we will perform another task, not only for researchers but also for a wider community, because we think it's quite relevant to not only speak to ourselves but also speak to the stakeholders as we are doing here in this podcast.
Yes, exactly. The next steps, as Filippo was describing, will also include the creation, on the basis of the models that were developed, of a so-called web tool. So this is one of the project outputs that Unibo had assigned still. And basically it will be a web site interface that will allow users to see practically the outcomes of the simulations that we will have run. And basically in the web tool, we will see the goal is to show the representation of different simulations that we will perform employing the models that were created. So as a wrap up, the building of the models that we have described until now led us to the identification of a representation of the systemic baseline, as we call it. Whereas for the final user, we strive to show some outcomes and so some scenarios, as also Filippo was saying, therefore to test how some specific interventions how the system can respond to some specific interventions. And so this is a bit of an explanation of what it will look like without spoiling too much, because then it will be available on all ENFASYS channels, and we believe that it will be a quite engaging tool, we hope. So
great, thank you. And do you know when it will be available, more or less?
Yeah. We are working on it. We are planning to present it in February 2026. Still some work is supposed to be done, also with other partners of the project, to ensure, again, all the simulations, all the results, and all the scenarios are grounded on evidences. So we are planning to have it in February, but I'm sure we will be updated by all the project partners.
Then we should organize new podcast episodes.
We should. We should. It's really funny here.
One last question for Giovanna. When you were building the static systems and the static causal loop diagrams, were you envisaging this future for the static systems, or
that is what they're made for? So usually that is why you build a static picture, is because it's such a powerful tool for example, policymakers, that this is what you do to foresee changes in whatever actions you want to take. So usually when you do system thinking, is to get to a system dynamic model. It's just that I'm too old to do this, so you have young brains. It is very complex because each of the elements, so we have been doing in other projects, but ENFASYS is an extremely complex project because it is basically bringing together a lot of elements that are usually worked on in silos. So it is one of the few cases that you have where a project is approaching so many different moving parts. And we're trying, to pull all these threads together into what the theory of change is, basically. But then we have, the behavioral part, you have the policy part, you have all these things that have to connect somehow, and you have to produce results that are useful for different target groups. You know this better than me, you work in communication. So this again a system dynamic model allows anyone. It's like in the episode that we recorded for Nibio, we talked about maps and Google Maps. The system dynamic model is the same. You would have the elements that, for example, are useful for you, and there may be other that are useful for Filippo or Arianna. And then you can calibrate them. So if you have payments that is one of the elements, you would say, and you have another connected elements that is engagement of the farmers, you would maybe be able to see, okay, what happens if we increase the payments of 20% on the engagement of the farmers, and that will be connected to another. So it dynamizes, so it gives movement to the static picture, but each of these elements has to be behind it. There is a tool that we use, which is called Vensima. I don't know if I can say names, but there is a program that you have to pay for. And that allows you to draw the static picture. And then if you click on that specific elements variable, you can put in the background an equation that then is connected to a data set. And that allows you, there is a little tuner that you can move up and down, and then you see what is going to happen with the system. So some of these lock-ins, they disappear, for example, or some others are arising. So it sort of gives you then the dynamic picture. But it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, but as well explained by Giovanna, it's also really funny, this calibration.
For you, when you're over 50, nothing is funny anymore.
Yeah,
you just
maybe it's that.
Sit on a beach and sip a drink.
yeah, but imagine when the models were finished and everything was calibrated and so on, and just as you said, changing the amount of payment or the knowledge that the farmers has, or the amount of support, you are seeing how in 10 years the system can evolve and can change. It's really interesting for me because it's a way of foresee what can happen if we really do something of our outcomes of the project in the food system. So if we ground it in the reality, so it's really interesting looking at it. Also because we don't know what will happen in 10 years. So the models is something that can explain a possibility,
a possible future.
A possible future. So it's also in that sense, it's quite interesting to see what a possible future can be.
If I can add one thing is that this is nothing new. These things have been done for ages. But this forecast. But the novelty here is that it is inclusive. We have been taking the wishes of everyone, and we're moving towards a common goal. And also there is the part of the behavioral change that hasn't been, at least not to my knowledge, included in such a complex system before for this specific output.
Yeah, if I may add, exactly, the novelty also of the process is the combination of different tools to achieve finally an outcome that allows such complex and grounded simulations of interventions. And yeah, we really believe that we try to come up with something interesting and relevant. So let's see.
Thank you for your great work, and thank you for being so innovative. Thank you to the young researchers to push the bar a bit. And thank you for coming here and for explaining so complex methodologies and models in a simple way for not only researchers to be able to understand what you have done, and also what are the results of your work. So thank you again for coming here. Thank you again for joining us today. I don't know, Filippo, if you want to close the episode.
I just want to thank you, Davide, because also it's quite hard to explain these complex methodologies. Also, together with Giovanna, the different aspects that are part of this pathway. But so really thank to you, because you are leading the conversation really well, and it's really useful for us to also to understand how to explain it, because sometimes researchers only speak to researchers, and this is maybe the biggest problem of the transition of the food system. So really thanks also for that.
Thank you for hosting us.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.